Okay, so hi everyone. This is this third day of the DevDays online, and today we are talking about Forge Design Automation. My name is Augusto Gonçalves. I'm a Forge developer advocate here at Autodesk, and well, I also post a lot of information about Forge and about what I do within Autodesk. I post that information on Twitter. So if you want to follow me, please use the handle Augusto Maia. You can see what I'm up to here. And yeah, next part is, well, part of what we're discussing today is still under beta, Design Automation version 3. So this is just safe harbor, meaning that as this is still in beta, we cannot promise that everything we discuss here will be available as a production in the production environment. That said, we are going to show you a lot of cool features that you can use today with your Design Automation Design Automation APIs. Just so we can save some bandwidth on everyone's computer, I will turn off my camera and come back with the camera when we go back to the Q&A session, Q&A part of this presentation. Okay, so let me stop the camera and keep to the next slide. So today we are this presentation on DevDays is really about explaining to you what is Design Automation version 3 and how to use it. And it's very technical on that perspective. So let's start with the very basic fundamentals about Design Automation. Then how we can use Design Automation with the overall idea of data at the center. And finally, some information about the beta program. And in the end, a longer time for Q&A, for questions and answers. I will try to look at the Q&A panel during the presentation at a few moments. And you can post your questions, and as soon as I get there, I will answer your questions, okay? So let's go to the next one, Fundamentals of Design Automation. So if you never heard about Design Automation, it's about having the power of our desktop applications in the cloud. At its essence is a simple input and output operation where we commonly know as batch operations. We do that on a desktop very often, batch processing files. So let's say, for example, in Design Automation, we can send an input file, process, and wait for the output that will produce and get those outputs, which is basically a batch operation, right? Well, with Design Automation, we have several different engines. We have 4 of those in Design Automation right now on beta version 3. We have AutoCAD, Inventor, Revit, and 3ds Max. All of those products are available on two versions, right? So the current version, which is 19 plus 18. I think AutoCAD is also available on 17, and 3ds Max is already live with the version 2020. So you can always choose which engine and which version to use Design Automation on your processes. Well, input and output on Design Automation are files, strictly speaking, right? Because those engines can not only read files and cannot access the internet. We cannot access, for instance, an external database or something else. We can only provide that information during the beginning and end of the operation. So you have to provide the data you need at the beginning. So we can say, we can pass like a JSON or XML file. And this is a very well-known feature that we are used to do that on our development, right? We create data in a JSON or XML file and pass that to our applications. So, Before we move forward, let's go to one sample so you can understand how it works, right? So in this case, at this first sample, let's use an input with one original file that contains some elements that we want to update the parameters. And we are also providing data in a format of a JSON. And the engine will run, modify those elements with the new values, and produce the output. Design Automation engine will update the parameters and create the new files that we want and save those back on a cloud storage that we can then download.
Sorry to disturb. Are you showing the sample?
No, not yet. I'm just describing what we're doing.
Sure, sorry. because somebody pointed out. So I thought of just checking with you. Sorry for the disturbance.
Of course, no problem. So this is just describing what the sample is supposed to do. So let's see this sample running. So this sample is available at the Learn Forge tutorial, that the link is on the top of the screen. And as you can see, I'm just specifying the new width and height value, selecting a DWG file, selecting the job, the activity that I want to run, and processing the file. In the end, I can download the result file. It's a very basic input, process, and output operation, like a batch processing. As Design Automation supports 4 different engines, I can run the same kind of job, same kind of activity for DWGs. Now I'm running for an IPT file, and right after that, we can also see the same thing running for a Max file, which is a 3D Max, and the last one is for Revit. So for AutoCAD, we are updating a dynamic block. For Inventor, we are updating a part with the parameters. With Max, we are updating the parameters of one instance. And finally, in Revit, we are updating a family instance inside the model. And again, input from my machine, I send to the cloud, process the files, download the results. Very basic batch operation. All right. So moving forward, when we use Design Automation, we're actually using a few concepts that I didn't actually explain this concept yet, right? So let's see what we have here. On that sample, we have an app bundle. The app bundle contains your code that is running inside Design Automation. The app bundle is pretty much an AutoCAD, Inventor, Revit, or 3D Max plugin. And this plugin should be on the language that those engines support. But you have to keep in mind that those plugins cannot contain anything on the UI or interactions with the user. So for AutoCAD, the plugin can be C#, C++. For Revit, it needs to be .NET, C# in most cases. Same for Inventor, and Max can also be a script, but can also be a .NET application. And remember that the plugin is running in batch mode. So it's just input, process, and output. This is actually telling, the bundle is telling what will be done inside your Design Automation processing. So on the sample we showed before, the app bundle specifies, defines for that specific engine and version, and the bundle contains the DLL and all the supporting files for that plugin to run. So the plugin is very much similar to plugins we post to the App Store, and usually contains a package contents.xml inside a bundle folder, also contains the DLL, and in some cases the add-in file. Now, well, on the other sample, we used this app bundle, but we actually selected an activity to run. So the activity defines how it should be done. So I have the bundle with the code, but I have to specify what I need as input and output for that. From that sample, the activity defines that we have one input file, one input JSON with the data, which is the new width and height, and also defines the output for that job to run, and that's defined inside the activity. In this case, the app bundle contains the code, and the activity contains the specification. Up until this point, we are not actually executing anything. We are just defining what we want to do with Design Automation. Next, we have the work item. So the work item is when we use the activity and the app bundle. On the activity, we define the actual file that we want to run, the actual data, and Design Automation will run the code and create the modified file. It's very important that the original file must be accessible online, and the output file needs to be a location where I want to write the bytes of the resulting file. In many cases, we can use the Forge OSS to store that information, but we can also store that information somewhere else, let's say AWS S3 bucket or Azure data service as well. anywhere that can be accessible. It can even be on your own server, as long as you have connection to the internet and that server is accessible online. So here are a few key points that of the topics we discussed so far, and it's very important to keep in mind those 3 points, right, about design automation. We need to define app bundles, then we define the activity, which tells how to run that code, and once we have that, we can execute several work items. A good way to look at this, thinking about as we are developers, right, is that the app bundle is the actual code inside the function. The activity is the definition of the function. And when we run it is when we execute that function, right? So that's a good analogy to look at this. So before I move forward, let me just take a quick look at the Q&A, just in case we have questions up until this point. So the first question from Stephanie is, what if an error occurs? Is there a log file similar possible? Stephanie, yes, there is a log file. Every time that you execute, let me say, so every time that you execute a work item, you can look at the status of that work item, and at the end of the work item, you can get the output. On that image that I showed before, you can see the entire output that is coming from the engine, telling it's downloading the files, it's executing your code, and you can see part of the problems, right? But the best way is to handle the errors inside your code. Remember, this is a batch operation, and you're not expecting user interaction within your bundle. So you need to handle all the possible scenarios. That's the best idea. So the next question, also from Stephanie, is it possible to get multiple output files? Yes, it is possible. Let me click on answer here. Oops, answer. Yes, it is possible to get multiple output files, and the best way to do it is with a zip. So you can create a folder and save all the files on that folder, and in the end, zip that folder, and that folder, that zip, sorry, will be sent to the output location. So will C++, next question from Navid, will C++ be available for programming Max design automation plugins? Or will be, so as far as I know, for Max right now, it's MaxScript and .NET. But if you can check on the C++, I think we have also planned to support it, but yeah, please check that with our support later. I will give you guys information on how to ask questions after this session. Just one more question. Can you repeat the analogy of bundles, activities, and work items, please? So the analogy was actually thinking as a developer that we usually create. We usually create the app bundle is the code. The activity is the function definition that defines the inputs that we need and the return argument, and that's the activity. And when we execute that, that's the analogy for a work item. Last one, can DA execute Dynamo add-in? Not yet. So the Zen Automation is not planning to support Dynamo. There are some research around it, but we don't support that yet. So I will stop with questions right now and come back to questions in a few moments. Don't worry, we have time for questions. So let's moving to the next topic. We started discussing about data at the center with the first presentation from Jim, and also Cyril yesterday. Cyril talked about Forge data platform, and this is essentially data at the center of your approach, right? So whenever you are talking about, you are trying to create an application, always think about the data and not replicating data and having that data as the initial and end of your processes. So the same idea applies to design automation, but the only thing that design automation is for the world that we have today with files, right? We don't yet have databases to store all the information we want for design and engineering, and we have files. So in that case, design automation is very good because we can handle data and keep that data up to date with design automation. That's the idea. Moving next here. So usually when we start, when I first showed you a diagram, and I'm a big fan of diagrams, I was showing a linear progress, right? So you have input and you move to the design automation and have an output, right? But well, the world is not like that. Usually have a data somewhere that we want to get that data and then save that data back to where the data lives, right? And the data actually can live anywhere. We don't really know where the data lives. It really depends on the customer. The data can be on BIM 360, it can be on Google Drive, Dropbox, Box. Can even be on AWS S3 bucket, which is the largest storage of objects we have, right? And that's data, that's the customer. The customer usually decides where the data lives. And for design automation, the data just needs to be accessible. And of course, it needs to be protected, but it needs to be accessible on the online, so design automation can read and write the results back to that data. So that's the part that is important. So our next sample used this idea of using the data that is living inside BIM 360. And for this sample, let's talk about Revit files, right? And the idea is to use design automation for Revit to upgrade Revit files, update the version of Revit files. And for this, let's get a file that is sitting inside BIM 360, move the version, let's say, from 18 to 19, and then save that back to BIM 360. It can be at the same file, just creating a new version on BIM 360, but can also be on a different folder. And this is a very typical batch processing approach. And but the idea is to have data back and forth, right? So this is the sample that Jim also showed the day before, Tuesday. And my colleague Zong Wu created this sample. And the idea is that you select a few files that are inside BIM 360. And he's just showing that the file is okay, it's working. He selects a folder with a lot of files and select the destination folder inside the same BIM 360 account. And when he clicks to start upgrading, we are going to start one work item for each of those files. That's the interesting piece about design automation, that we can have several instances of design automation running, and for each of those, each of the files we have. And each instance of design automation is a work item that is running. He's also using a few other tools on BIM 360 just to log issues when we cannot migrate the files, so we can monitor that later and track if something went wrong. You can get the source code for this sample. This sample was written in Node.js, the web application piece. The plugin was written in .NET because it's a plugin for Revit, and you can download the entire source code and see it, how to set it up on the GitHub that you see on the top. Okay, so moving forward, let me take a quick look at the questions. So we know any plans to add format to the A workflow? I think that was a question, a similar question before yesterday. We don't have that yet, but we are, as Design Automation V3 is still in beta, the best idea is to post that on our support system, or even better, on the design, on the beta forum, so others can vote up as this request, so we can prioritize this one. Okay, thanks, Steve. Next one is which Revit versions are supported in the A. So right now we support the last update of 18 and the last update of 19, and the plan is to support the new versions as soon as they come live. And the last one, is it possible to use Design Automation to automatically create IFC files from Revit models? So IFC support is still under development inside Design Automation. But if you really want to just create IFC files, the best way is to use model derivative, where you can just upload the RVT and get the IFCs, and you don't have to handle the code itself, the code yourself. There is a service just for that, to convert Revit files to IFCs inside model derivative. But that will be available inside Design Automation soon, right? That's the plan. So I will come back to questions later. let me go back on the presentation. Okay, so before we move to the next sample, a couple extra things we need to know here, right? The web, when we have a web application, in most cases, the web run based on events. It's very complicated for one system to just keep asking the other about updates that will create a lot of traffic. So it's better that one system that is the one that holds the information tells the other about that. So when we want to run something with Design Automation, the best idea is that our application can just wait until something happens. Let's say a new file is uploaded, a new file is created, or some action from the user. Then we start the process on Design Automation, and our application can then wait again, because the process can take a few seconds, but can also take a few hours, depending on how big the model is and how complex is your job. So when done, Design Automation will tell our application that the processing is done, and we can then go there and collect the output of our processing. Those events from system telling us something happened and Design Automation telling our application that the processing is done, those events are called webhooks or callbacks. And this is available in many APIs, including Forge APIs. So we have events for Design Automation, we have events for data management. And also, if you look at some other hosts like Google Drive, Box, Dropbox, etc., they do have events as well. So that's very important, and we need to pay attention to events. So on this next sample, we're actually using that, right? So we are starting to monitor events on a BIM 360 folder, and that's happening on the left. Also on the left, we see the jobs or the events that are being triggered. So once we start monitoring a folder, the user can then go and upload a file to BIM 360. BIM 360 will tell our application that a new file was uploaded, in this case, a version 2 of that file, and we then start doing something. We are processing that file. The processing of that file in this case is to start Design Automation. So our code cannot really check the RVT, but can start Design Automation and collect the output. When Design Automation is ready, Design Automation will call back our application telling that the process of checking that file is done, and we can collect the results of that analysis. The results are actually just a list of IDs on that model with problems. So if that list of IDs, we can then create an issue and go back on BIM 360 and check the issues that were created from that file. So this process is based on events, and we have 2 events here, right? And in the end, when we click on the issue, we can see the problems on a custom viewer showing the IDs that Design Automation returned to us. So that's the interesting thing, right? Do not keep calling Design Automation, or do not keep calling any other system about data if a webhook or callback is available. So I like this sample very much because it shows very different APIs from Autodesk and BIM 360. And well, I do love diagrams, and this is a more complete description of what just happened. It's interesting that on this sample, we also used MongoDB to store the 3-legged authentication we need, right? Remember that the event, the webhook callback, can happen at any time, and we need to restore the authentication to read that data. The custom viewer that is showing the issues in the end, it's going back to BIM 360 to get the issue information. So all the data is actually hosted inside BIM 360. The viewer on my custom application is not storing data by itself, but it's getting the data from BIM 360. So just to summarize again, we upload a new version of the model, webhooks will trigger, we start a job on Design Automation to check that file, store the results inside the S3 bucket here. When it's ready, we just create issues, and the issue will appear to the user, and then the user can click and view the problems inside the viewer. So that's the overall idea of this sample. And this diagram is also available at the GitHub sample. So one more important point about callbacks and webhooks is that, well, you may not think it, but we are on the clock on those events, right? Just because we cannot, when Forge call back you telling that something is done, Forge cannot wait for you to finish your job. So it's very important that your application returns 200 okay as soon as possible. Telling, okay, I acknowledge that I received that message, and later when you are ready, you can process your job. Do not process your job on the actual callback, because that may take several seconds or even minutes, and it's possible that the webhook or callback may be disabled or even try again because it's not getting a response from you. So it's important for your application to return 200. And on that sample that I showed before, we have a queuing system, queuing library, sorry, that is available for .NET. There are libraries for many other systems and even hosts. They have libraries or services to host queuing of jobs. And that library is called Hangfire, and it's available for .NET as a open source library, which is quite interesting and works well for .NET applications, if you want to start with that. So, well, what about more complex scenarios? So this is very similar to the other one, but in this case, I have two engines, right? So this is also possible. Remember that we always have to think about triggering events one after the other. So in this case, I have Revit, and I also have Inventor. So the idea of this sample is when we see a new IPT coming inside a folder, we're going to trigger Inventor to convert that IPT to SAT file, and then use the SAT file to update the family, and then update the family inside the RVT project. So this is the sample running. As you can see, I like to reuse my samples, and the left side is actually the same thing as the other one, because I have the start monitoring the job, and I can see that I have an IPT with a chair without the head rest. The next step on this demonstration is to upload a new version of the IPT, which will trigger the first step of the processing, right? So when I upload, the Forge will tell me that there is a new file there, and I can then start the first Inventor job to convert from IPT to SAT. Then convert the second job will be to convert the SAT to RFA, import inside the RFA, and update inside the RVT family. And the last piece, which is just on Forge, we need to tell the system that we have a new version for that file, and that's the last and third and last step of this sample, showing how we need to create a version in the end. That's the post-process file in this case. So we see now that we have a version 2 of the table chair, and when we click on it, we see that the family was updated. And yeah, that's it. So as I said, I do like diagrams. So that's the diagram of that sample. This is a bit more complicated, but you can see that right here in the middle, the process to run Inventor and run Revit is essentially the same. What is actually changing here is the specification of the activity and the work item we have for each of those. Again, you can see those samples inside GitHub with a complete description of how it works and how to set it up locally. So before I move forward, let me take a quick look at the Q&A, the questions. So Navid, the question is Autodesk providing a centralized storefront for Autodesk customers to find design automation apps and for developers to monetize their apps, just like the App Store? We don't have that yet. There is a way to create public bundles and public activities, but we don't have a centralized directory for that yet. The next one is, oops, let me just go back on this slide before I move. Sorry. Just the next question. We are using C360 for our projects, where almost all of our jobs is to create configurable manufacturing models. Does now Design Automation API allow us to do the same? Can I make models with iLogic or VB.NET like I do in Inventor? So with design automation for Inventor, you can use the Inventor server, not the Inventor application. And I'll talk more about that. And I think it really depends on what kind of job you are running. But keep in mind that the design automation is not meant to be real-time configurator. But you can run jobs that will take a few moments to run, and then you get the output. Slide done, close. So moving forward, one very important topic about design automation, and this is valid for all the engines, is that the design automation runs in a sandbox environment, and this is very important. This means that we don't have access to internet during the processing of the file. We can just send files at the beginning and collect the files in the end. We just have access to the executing folder and subfolders, of course. So do not try to access something like C or a root folder or app data, program files, program data. None of those folders are available, just the working folder. So this is very important, and that's what you need for design automation. And of course, there is no UI and no user input on your code. So your code needs to run completely independent, no input, no UI. So just to summarize a few key points. So we talked before about app bundle, activities, and work items. And later we talked about callbacks and sandbox environment. So those are the key points to think about when and consider when developing your design automation application. So as I said, design automation version 3 is still running in beta, and there are a few considerations about that. Version 3 is in beta, but version 2 is in production, right? So version 2 supports AutoCAD, and version 3 supports AutoCAD, Inventor, Revit, and 3D Max. Well, it is in beta, but you can use it, and we actually want you to use it so we can properly dimension and scale our servers. Most of the functionality is already there. It's just the API is still in beta, just because we still need some time to verify that we can scale up for your demands. So yeah, you can go ahead and test it. And if you're doing that on your application, as Jim said on the first day, you can just say, okay, my application is also in beta because Autodesk is in beta. Well, being in beta, we have a few limitations on design automation, and that's very important. And for AutoCAD, here are a few of those. We have some custom enablers for Civil 3D, OMF, etc. But we cannot really access that information on our code, right? We can just use the object enablers to make sure that the objects are created properly. And most of the error messages inside AutoCAD were removed, so you have to handle that yourself. That applies to all the engines, actually. So keep that in mind. About Inventor, as I said, we can use like Inventor server, not Inventor application. A few Excel features are still limited. We can read Excel values, but write or use Excel just like in desktop in VBA, this is not possible. This is not possible because Excel is not installed inside Design Automation. It's just Inventor, right? We don't have ETO or C360 support. And in some cases, you want to use Inventor to create families using Revit Core Engine, but this is not available yet. That's why on the other sample, we converted from IPT to SAT and not to RFA, which is something that is supported locally. We don't have the add-ins that are inside Inventor, like those that are listed here, and of course the iLogic add-ins as well. About Revit, and we don't have yet support for Navisworks links. We don't support cloud paths, printing, and IFC. That's something that we're still working on. And of course, as on the others, we have to handle the error messages and warnings. Let's say you are removing a wall that you cannot remove, and there is a warning there, you have to use the failure API to handle those problems. Finally, on 3D Max, we only have access to 3ds max patch.exe. That's the same we have on desktop to test, but that's the one we have on design automation. The user will run on low integrity, so that's important as well for your processes. And well, you can only run on the executing folder and subfolders. And also rendering with Arnold for now will show a watermark on those renderings. Let me again take a look at the Q&A before we move forward. What are the differences between V2 and V3 beta? For AutoCAD is very much similar because AutoCAD is available on V2, but we have a better scalability and quotas for V3, and that's a good point to move to V3, even if you have just AutoCAD, right? The next one is from Michael. Is for Civil 3D as well an integration plan to touch infrastructure elements in the same way? I don't have the answer if or when Civil 3D will be available as part of design automation. As I said, only the object enablers are there, but not the Civil 3D or any other vertical APIs. So if you want to use the APIs, those are not yet available. The last one is, how does AutoCAD engine support verticals such as map, civil, etc., other than object enablers? With Core Console, we could start with the product. How to do that with Forge engine? On the desktop, you can actually start with a different product because you have those products installed, which is a different thing from having just the enablers. So if you install just AutoCAD and install the object enablers, you can load those drawings, but you cannot access the APIs or the specific features for those products. You can do this on the desktop because most likely, I think, you have the other products installed, and yeah, that's the difference here. Okay, and moving forward. So on V3, we have a much better way of handling quota, and this is very important when we are doing batch processing. You have to handle too many requests response, which is 429. And this is important because, let's say you want to batch process 100 files, but you cannot do it at one call, right? You have to do it 100 calls, for, let's say. So there are a few limits here. So I would recommend you to go to the Forge website and go select V3 on design automation and take a very detailed look at the quotas for V3. You see that we have number of uploads, total size, processing time, and in sizes of the bundles and files on the work item. So yeah, take a look at this. Okay, I think that's the coming to the end of this presentation. Well, if you have questions, we have the documentation is available on the Forge portal. Just remember that you have to select Design Automation version 3 on the documentation. When you click on Design Automation, that will open version 2 by default. So you have to switch to version 3. You can also ask questions on Stack Overflow, and myself and my team, we monitor Stack Overflow, and every time that you post a new question there, we are going to receive an email. And just remember to add the tag Autodesk-Design Automation, and then myself and my team, we will answer you. And of course, we have a lot of samples. Just go to GitHub and go to the Autodesk Forge organization there, and you can see all the samples on Design Automation. The samples for Design Automation, we will start with Design Automation, and then have the language and then what it does, right? So it will be Design Automation -C# check issues, for instance. That's one of the samples I was showing before. And we have a few other samples. I also recommend that you take a look at the blog posts. There are several blog posts, but a few that are very interesting for Design Automation. So that was one of the questions, right? How to handle multiple inputs and outputs. So there is a blog explaining how to do it. And yeah, take a look at that one. If you're going to write Revit plugins for Design Automation, we did an accelerator in Boston 3 weeks ago. And during that event, I saw people having a lot of different problems and debugging those problems. And then I compiled a list of those problems. So if your code is not working, take a look at that one first. And well, when you are writing applications for design automation, it's a very good idea to debug them locally. For AutoCAD, you can just use AC Core Console. For Inventor, it's just the Inventor server, which is like a batch operation as well. For Max script is also 3ds Max script. But for Revit, that's a bit more tricky, right? So there is a way to do it on Revit, and there is a blog and a video recording explaining how to do it, and that's the last blog post on that list. Finally, let's go back to the Q&A. And you should see at the bottom Q&A button. Just click there, and you can post your question. So let me take a look here. Francesca, can design automation work with modules uploaded into my bucket or only BIM 360? So design automation can work with any module that is hosted on any server. Can be BIM 360, can be buckets, and can be S3, can be Google Drive, Box, anything. The thing is, you have to take care of the authorization on the where the file is, right? So if the file is hosted on BIM 360, you need the permission from the user. If the file is hosted on a bucket, you need permission from the owner of the application, owner of the bucket. If the file is hosted on S3, for instance, then you need the AWS key and secret, and keep going like that. You need to authorize on that server to access those files. The next one from Tolgai is, so is it going to be possible to create, by the way, just one more point about the files, any files, I said any files, and yeah, in any location. The only thing is those limitations on Revit files that are, let's say, on collaboration for Revit, BIM 360 design, for instance, which is something that we don't support yet. So those are the files hosted on the cloud. That was what that topic was about. Going to the Tollgate question. So is it going to be possible to create a configurator type application which forges design automation in, let's say, V4? Where can I see what type of Inventor API functions I could use? Well, we're on V3. I don't have I think we don't have a roadmap for V4 defined yet. We're still finishing V3, which is still in beta. The API, the functions that are available for Inventor are the same functions you can use with Inventor Server. Just remember that you cannot use those plugins that I mentioned, Excel, and it needs to run without any UI. It needs to be in batch mode, right? The next one from Michael is, can we plot the 2D sheets to PDF in Revit via design automation? You can generate some DWG files, for instance. There is a blog post on that. I think PDF, which is the plot to PDF, that piece is not yet supported. I was showing that before on the, remember when I was showing the what is not supported on Revit? In that, let me just come back here. I think it's better, right? Come back here. No printing. So if you're talking about printing to PDF, this is not supported. Next one is, what Inventor files versions are supported by DA? What are the well, we support the current version and the previous one, so 19 and 18, and of course we plan to support new versions as soon as they come live. Let me see what else we have here. I can see a few other questions in the chat window. I think Vero replied most of them, right? Yes.
Yeah, so there's one question on the tutorials for design automation.
Yes. So the tutorials, actually, there is a tutorial inside inside the Forge Dev portal, but there is also a tutorial on the LearnForge, and that was one of the first samples I showed on the beginning here. Let me come back right at the beginning of this presentation. I know this is not common to go back on the presentation, but let's just remind us here. Right here, so that was the first sample I was showing. And if you go to learnforge.autodesk.io and select Modify Models tutorial, the tutorial will teach you how to create an application very similar to the one you are seeing on the screen right now. Anything else, Spiro?
No, I think that's it. So there was a question on
yeah, there is another one here. Can you get the PPT? Well, we're going to post the recording with this presentation, and I'm also going to publish this presentation on our blog because it's something that is already there on the Learn Forge tutorial, and also on the Forge Dev website. Next one from Amorin: is Zen automation available in other languages than English? Yes, yes, it is available in other languages. You just have to switch the language when you are launching the application, right? So using Design Automation, there is actually a script or a command line to run the application. You say, let's say revit.exe/I, meaning the file, /L, and then you can pass the new language. And that's a very, very good question and a very important topic. Let's say you want to use Revit in French, for instance. You can just pass FR, and that will not that will launch Revit in French, for instance, and avoid problems with encoding or types of properties or anything like that. So yes, you have to use the actual engine on the language that we want, not Design Automation, but yes, it's possible. The next one is, there is no UI functionality at all. Yes, there is no UI, absolutely not. You cannot use anything that interacts with the user. If you try to do so, the engine will just return failure, or even will halt and wait until it times out. So if you ask the user for input, the system will not work, right? So this is very important. And remember, it's a batch operation. You pass the input, pass the sequence of commands that you want to run, it will run, and you get the output. That's it. There is no interactions with the user. The next one from Prasant is, can model properties in Forge support other languages? Support other languages, I'm not sure what you mean here. Maybe if you retype your question, do you mean on the Forge viewer or on Forge Design Automation? Maybe I'm missing something. If you can retry.
So before,
yeah, Forge Viewer. Yeah, Forge Viewer. So on Forge Viewer, if you get a file, let's say, just to give you an example, if you have a Revit file that was created in English and the name of the properties are in English, then the Forge Viewer will show those properties in English. If the model was created in another language, let's say French or Spanish, and the properties are in Spanish, the viewer will show those properties in Spanish or English or any other language, right? So the names of the properties will be on the language.
Oh, there was one question on pricing. I've given the pricing link, but if you want to add anything on a pricing for a design automation, it will be helpful.
What do you mean, pricing?
The cost.
Oh, pricing. Yes, pricing. Sorry. So Design Automation V3 is still in beta, meaning we're not charging for it. It's free. You can use it. We don't have yet a defined model for V3. If you look at V2, which only supports AutoCAD, the price is 2 cloud credits per hour, but that's only for V2, right? For V3, we're still discussing, and again, it's in beta, it's free, use it, and that will help us understand the costs and how to charge you in the future. But that's for V3. A lot of interesting questions. Let's see what else. Amorin, doesn't the possibility to receive input from the user limit the flexibility of this tool, which is possible? Will it be possible in the future? Also, if I need the user to input some data. So Amorin, it's not about not being able to get input from the user, right? You can get input from the user, but you cannot get it during the process, right? So you have to collect all the input from the user before you start the work item, send out that data to the work item, and the work item will handle that data during the process, right? It's just a matter of collecting the data before you start, right? And the reason this is important is that design automation runs on a service that is costing us, right? We don't want to hold the application until your user will input the data. So it's better to get the data before process and get the output. And essentially, design automation is a batch processing tool, right? So when we're talking about batch processing, we don't get input during the processing. So yes, you can get data, but get it before you start the processing of the file. And what should I use for that? I think what you mean is how can you collect the data? Yes, you can collect the data using a web application, a desktop application. Just remember to collect the data before you actually start the processing. So the next one from Kivank is: Are all the document objects available in Forge v3 for Inventor? I think you mean by the document types inside Inventor, like let's say you have a part document, assembly document. Is that it? If so, it is the same that you have available inside Inventor server, which is available. Those documents are available inside Inventor server. So yeah, I think if you have a specific code, you can just try to run that with Inventor server. That would be the best way to describe it. Or when you go to the documentation, you can also see if that API and that object, that API object, is available inside Inventor server or just Inventor application. The next one from Navid is it possible to get process percent during the batch job? Yes, it is possible to get the progress update. Actually have two callbacks inside Design Automation. I just showed one on complete, meaning Design Automation will call back telling that the job is done. But there is also another callback that is on progress, right? And every time it changes, it will call you, or every few moments will call you, passing the update. But as you have the work item, you can always get the update using the work item if you're not getting any response for a long time. Right? But you can use the callback on progress to get updates during the processing. Just one more point about the on progress. The on progress is available for AutoCAD, Inventor, and 3D Max, but it's not yet available in Revit. We are working on it. But yeah, for Revit, you can Revit Design Automation will only call you when the processing is done. For now. The next one from Daniels is, how responsive will be the service? Is there a possibility of queuing? The services will queue up your job if no server is available. So let's say we have 1,000 servers running, right? And we have 2,000 jobs. Well, we have to queue up the other 1,000 jobs until the first 1,000 jobs are done, right? So I don't know the number of servers we have today, but the jobs will queue up depending on how busy it is at that moment. And that's where we need your help and help from all of you to help us properly dimension our servers so we can have the proper amount of processing power to run your jobs. So please test the beta API. Next one from Francesca is there a sample of code collecting the input of the user? So the input of the user before we start the job, yes, the sample on LearnForge is doing that. It's collecting width and height and passing that to Design Automation in form of a JSON file. And yeah, that's an interesting way of collecting data at the beginning, right? The other sample check issues is collecting data in the end of the processing, but not in the beginning of the process. So those are very different samples, but yeah, you can pass data at the beginning and collect data in the end. That data can be a text file, can be a JSON, XML, any kind of data. Next one for Cobos is, you mentioned that the app bundle code is done in number of languages, .NET, C#, etc. Is there any plan to use Python, or is there any plan of creating a grammar that translates Python code into those app bundle codes? So Python is just because we just support the language that are supported on those engines. In many Python applications, developers are actually using COM ActiveX to use Python. And that's the part that is actually not supported, right? The COM objects. So, but if you use Iron, I think it's Iron Python, right? That compiles to .NET intermediate language. That should be possible because it's the same .NET, right? So for AutoCAD, for instance, we support .NET, and that .NET can be in any language that is compatible with .NET. Next one from Fausto is there no limitation on Revit fabrication? I'm not aware of any limitations in there. Well, if the fabrication you mean is part of the API, all the entire API, the .NET API objects should be available, but I'm not aware of any limitations there. Have you tried anything that failed? Yeah, please let us know. The other one from Kivank is, will Forge become an alternative product for C360? Not yet. Well, Zen Automation is not planned to replace this product. Zen Automation is about batch processing the files. It can be used as a configurator in some cases, but it's a different scenario. From Dinos, will be there a possibility for reserved resources? It's important for a service that are sold as service for predictive responsiveness, or is only meant to be internal use? That's a very interesting point. How to get a priority queuing? I think that's the question, right? That's something to explore. And if that's so, please send us a better business case and use case for that. Use the Forge help at autodesk.com email so we can understand better. And we can even ask the engineering team to contact you back and understand more what you mean by that. And as I said, Design Automation V3 is still in beta. We're still figuring out a few of those pieces. That's why we need your feedback. And that's a very interesting one. Yeah, please send us and the use case and the business case so we can understand better why and if that would be possible or not. Yeah, thank you. From Amorin, is there an interaction of Design Automation with Navisworks? No, Design Automation is for AutoCAD, Inventor, Revit, and 3D Max, not Navis yet. Yeah, and as I said on the Revit, a few Navisworks features are not exposed, right? Yeah, the Navisworks features are not exposed. If you're trying to do just clash detection, there is a Forge, a BIM 360 product that is BIM 360 model coordination that is part of those features on the cloud. We don't have APIs on that BIM 360 module, but that's where we are going on the cloud, having that collaboration on the cloud. All right, we are almost at the hour. Any other questions? Vero, anything else on the chat window?
No, I've not seen anything else. The only thing is, yes, the PPTs will be available as PDF and recording will be available to you in a couple of days' time.
Yes, that's right. So
I think it's fine. You can stop the recording.
Awesome. Let me start the recording. And recording, yes. Thank you everyone for coming. I think we had 120 attendees. That was really good. And yeah, thank you very much. And hope to see you next week on the BIM 360 presentation with Kako Harada.
I have stopped recording.